attitudes are not those that are presented by the establishment propaganda system, including the media. And so, and it's pretty striking the way it works. Also, one of the forms of this kind of neoliberal attack on the population has been sharply reducing taxes on the wealthy and on the corporations. The population's overwhelmingly opposed to that. It's been poll after poll for 40 years has shown that people want increased taxes on the rich. Those polls often aren't even reported, literally. The New York Times, for example, has sometimes not reported its own polls, which show that people want taxes on the wealthy and the corporate sector. Same with, take the health system. The U.S. health system is an international scandal. It has twice the per capita costs of comparable countries and some of the worst outcomes. And the reason is it's privatized. So it's very inefficient, a lot of bureaucracy, paperwork, big salaries.
One side or the other. The problem in public health is common because...
No, it's not.
Because on the private side, of course, it's from the basis.
There's a problem everywhere, but in the United States there's a scandal, not a problem. Again, twice the per capita costs and poor outcomes. That's different than the problems of public health everywhere. Well, what does the public want? It wants a system like other countries. Support is so high that in polls, many people have been asked, is the right to health in the Constitution? And a large part of the population thinks it is in the Constitution because they're so supportive of it, they don't know what's in the Constitution, but they figure if something's good, it's in the Constitution. Well, that tells you two things. And first of all, how little people know about what's going on. Of course, none of that begins to be true. But also how resistant kind of social democratic attitudes are, kind of basically leftish attitudes to the mass propaganda system. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why people have to be kept in ignorance. They can't, if they find out what the reality is, they're not going to accept it. So they have to be kept in ignorance or marginalized in some fashion. And again, we're back to the task of activists try to break through these barriers.
Our feeling is that once we write down something or translate something very important, very heavy, which we understand, we have just a small quantity of people reading the matter, and very often it's the same people interchanging information,
That's
and we trust to be much more than what we really are. Okay, and most of the population is continually bombarded by the media saying the same usual things 3, 4 times, 20 times, and then
it's always true. Propaganda systems are going to be controlled substantially by power. It's kind of a social law. You can't. To try to change that is like trying to change the law of gravity. Of course, that's going to be true, but you don't have to succumb to it. You don't have to stay on the ground all the time because gravity says you should go down. You can also jump, and that's exactly what activism is always about. And there are a lot of ways to do it. So you take a look at real successful activism. How does it work? I mean, maybe let's take my own city, Boston. So groups will go to a poor area, maybe poor immigrants who don't even speak English, and start to try to get them organized to do something simple, like maybe get a traffic light so children can walk across the street when they go to school. And if people organize and try to get a traffic light, and if they succeed, they can learn, we can do something. And then you go on to something else, and then it goes on. That's what activism and organizing is. It's not sitting somewhere and talking to your friends. I mean, it does involve getting involved with real people's problems.
Within the people.
Whatever those problems are. Maybe not what, we're talking to each other, maybe about an economic system based on the workers' control. Okay. Maybe the people were thinking about trying to figure out how to put food on the table. Okay, you've got to worry about that. On the other hand, even far-reaching things like say, the industry based on workers' control. You don't have to wait for utopia for that to happen. It's already happening in large parts of the world. So in the United States, in Mexico, in Egypt, and other places, I don't know about here maybe, there's a spread of worker-controlled enterprises, cooperatives, other ways of breaking out of the economic system. They can be developed within the present society. Argentina, it's not impossible.
It's a war with Argentina because they have all the world against Argentina. They tried to do something and they
tried.
They are
but
trying
notice
now
that
to put them down once again.
Argentina, back in 2000, refused to pay its debts.
Yeah.
And the whole world, the economics profession said you're going to be destroyed. The world was against it. Some of the highest growth rates in Latin America. Mexico, on the other hand, accepted the U.S. trade agreement, NAFTA. It's had the second lowest growth rate in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, the press lies about it constantly lies about it. Economics profession lies about it. The World Bank lies about it, because they have to present the belief that these so-called trade agreements, which aren't really trade agreements, are very successful. So they just lie. It's been exactly the opposite of the facts. And again, we're back to what organizers can do, what alternative media can do. It's sometimes what actual media can do. Like discussions of these things sometimes do appear in mainstream media, like The Gardening at least. Could happen. It could certainly happen in Italy. I mean, yes, the barriers are obviously going to be there. I mean, people with power aren't going to say, thank you, I'm going to give up my power. No, they're going to struggle to keep it. They have plenty
Well,
of...
in Italy they say, okay, you take the power, but
What?
in Italy it's different because they misuse the words. They say, okay, I'll give the power to you, then keep going on without any change.
One of the standard techniques of propaganda, but you don't have to accept it any more than you have to accept that we have a government of by and for the people or any other propaganda images. You don't have to accept the idea that when some West invade some third world country, we're liberating them. Of course that will be said.
Should we, okay, first of all, thanks a lot again. Should we change the topic for a moment, going to a personal questions? I mean, nothing so personal, of course, we're not going. Something like, do you mind any particular error which allowed you to learn from the error itself? You made an error, a mistake, and did you learn from that mistake? Do you remember, first of all, do you remember some kind of mistake that you made? And
sure.
Is there something so important that you have learned from that mistake that you should say, okay, there is something I want to tell you because I've made such an incredible mistake and there is something I want to tell you. I have to learn
All the time.
all the time.
I mean, first of all, in the sciences it works all the time. You find errors in your own work, you correct them. Other people find errors, you make it public, and that's standard. It's not even an issue in
Yeah, of
serious
course.
work. But I mean, there are people who try to conceal it, but it's standard in the political arena. Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, like for example, in the early days of the Vietnam War, early 1960s, when I was giving talks about it and so on, involved in activism, but I misdescribed it. I described it as a civil war in which the United States was illegitimately intervening. I remember at one point very well a woman, I don't know if you know her name, Barbara Deming, who's an old nonviolent activist, mentioned to me that I was mistaken, that it's not a civil war in which the United States is intervening, it's U.S. aggression. That's quite different. And she was right. And I changed what I was doing and picked up, often referred to that and changed it. You learn as you proceed. You learn from other people. You learn from their reading and so on.
Yeah, okay. I do believe it's normal. I mean, I do believe it happens sometimes, of course, to make a mistake, especially for me. Or
None of us is unable to make mistakes. That doesn't happen.
okay. Okay, other personal question. What stimulates your curiosity today? I mean, what are you going to try to discover again? Is there something that you're still trying to discover, something that really makes up your curiosity you want to discover at all? Something special?
All the time. That's what reading is about. For example, I just finished a very important book,
Yeah?
which I've already mentioned to you without naming it. It's the first scholarly study which demonstrates conclusively Cuba's role in the liberation of Africa.
So the one you were talking about before?
That's what I mentioned before.
Yeah, yeah.
That's been hidden all these years. It's still hidden. It's even hidden in scholarship. But the breakthrough is there, and now it's important for us to explain it. What does all this mean? Yeah, so you learn something. Now you try to go on and learn more. In the professional work, it's all the time. I mean, there are major questions about the nature of language, nature of mind, the human evolution, and all kinds of things in discovery.
I don't know if we have time, but I have one more question. Okay, this is not in the program. I was wondering about myself and the Italian situation, the politics situation. Okay, supposing that we are in a situation in which I consider myself like a radical from the left, and I have to make a vote, to make a vote, okay, and I can choose from left radical vote, and I know that this vote will be lost. Will be lost because, of course, there is not enough amount of voters to go for this party, so it will be lost. So I can decide not to vote, okay, so that's another option, or I can vote for what we call it is the not so bad party, something like.
Well, is there not so bad?
Yeah, I mean, so.
I don't know if there is one in Italy. The parties look.
Yeah, you're right. So I was wondering, of course, actually, my position has always been the same. I'm going to vote for the left radical party, even if I know that will not be counted effectively I mean.
Well, first of all, Italy has a parliamentary system,
Yeah.
unlike the United States. So it's at least possible for I don't know the exact numbers you're doing, but it's at least theoretically possible for a small radical party to have a parliamentary representation. In fact, it does. It happens. And that can mean something. It's different in the United States, where if you vote for anything but a Democrat or Republican, it's not going to enter the political system. But in parliamentary systems, it does. But nevertheless, the same question arises all the time. And it's, in my personal view, it's a kind of question that ought to take about 10 minutes of your time, and then you go back to important things.
Yeah, of course.
But in those 10 minutes, you have to ask a question. Is the difference between the main choices sufficient so that it makes sense to vote against one of them? You're really not voting for anybody. Like if somebody in the United States voted Democratic in the last election, if they were sensible, they weren't voting for Obama. They were voting against Romney, saying, okay, this is going to be, it's not just Romney, it's they represent somewhat different groups, they have different groups, segments of private capital backing them, which is what ultimately swings the election. They have somewhat different constituencies. So is that difference big enough in my 10 minutes in which I think about this, I try to decide if that difference is big enough to matter. Then in the 2 minutes it takes to vote, I do it or not. But meanwhile, the rest of your life goes on.
Okay, go on the street and help the people or try to fight, okay.
Yeah.
Guys, I do believe we're okay.
All the time, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.